The sun was merciless that afternoon in Austin, Texas. Sweat beaded along my temples as I adjusted the cheap folding chair under the bleachers. I wasn't here to be seen, just to witness. It was my younger sister Natalie's graduation day. My mom had called to remind me, not to invite me. "Just don't cause a scene," she'd said with a sigh. "It's Natalie's big day. Try to be decent." Decent. As if I'd ever been anything else. I arrived alone, clutching a small bouquet of yellow tulips, Natalie's favorite when she was a little girl. Back when we still played dress-up together and thought we'd never drift apart. That was before Mom started comparing everything I did to Natalie. Before Dad left. Before I became the family's cautionary tale. I tried not to shrink into myself as I walked past my family. They had all gathered in one neat row, reserved and labeled, "Family of the Valedictorian." Mom wore pearls. Her husband, Greg, had that permanent country club Dan. My aunt and cousins were there too, clapping and laughing like this was a royal event. There was no space for me in that row. Literally. No chair, no name tag. I found an empty one 3 rows back, behind a woman holding a crying baby. The program started. The principal made some half-hearted speech about excellence and perseverance. But I wasn't listening. I was watching my mother. Her perfect posture. Her smug smile as she leaned over to whisper something in Greg's ear, both of them laughing. I felt a familiar sting in my chest, jealousy, maybe. Or just grief for a family that no longer saw me. Then, Natalie stepped on stage. Her golden curls were pulled into an elegant bun. Her honor cords draped perfectly over her spotless white gown. The crowd shared. She looked radiant and distant. Next, our valedictorian, Natalie Scott, will deliver her speech, the announcer beamed. I clapped politely. No one else in my row moved. A man beside me actually checked his phone. Natalie walked to the microphone, took a deep breath, and smiled. "Good evening, faculty, friends, and family," she began. "I want to start by thanking the people who helped me get here, especially my mom and Greg, for their endless support, and my mentors who encouraged me through every challenge." There was no mention of me. Not a whisper of the sister who used to braid her hair, or who took care of her when Mom was too tired or too busy. But I didn't expect to be included. Not anymore. What I didn't expect, though, was what came next. "I'd also like to acknowledge those who showed me what not to become," she continued, her tone turning sharper. "People who chose to abandon responsibility and blame others instead of improving themselves. To them, thank you for showing me the consequences of poor choices." There was a moment of silence. A few people glanced around, unsure of how to react. But my mom. She was smirking. Greg nodded like this had been rehearsed. I felt a hot flush crawl up my neck. My fingers clenched around the tulips. I couldn't be sure, Natalie hadn't said my name, but everyone who knew us. They knew. I was the example of failure. The sister who dropped out of college after having a child too young. The one who had to take 2 jobs to make rent. The one they never invited to family barbecues. My son, Mason, was sitting beside me. Just 12, but sharp as a tack. He leaned over and whispered, "Mom. Was she talking about you?" I didn't answer. I just stared ahead, blinking rapidly. Mason sat quietly for a moment, then squeezed my hand. "That wasn't right," he said, voice tight. "It's okay," I whispered back, forcing a smile. "She earned this." But it wasn't okay. Natalie went on to quote Shakespeare, throw in a couple of jokes, and thank her future university. Everyone clapped when she finished. Some even stood. My family erupted in cheers. Mom actually wiped a tear. I sat still, frozen in my own skin. Later, during the reception outside, I approached the table where refreshments were served. No one made space for me. I poured myself some lemonade, mostly to keep my hands busy. Natalie was surrounded by friends and faculty, smiling for photos. Then her eyes met mine. I smiled and held out the tulips. "Congratulations," I said. She blinked, caught off guard, then took them hesitantly. "Thanks," she muttered. That speech was powerful. She looked down, clearly uncomfortable. "I didn't mean." "No," I interrupted gently. "You meant every word. And that's okay. I just hope someday you understand what it cost me to make sure you got the future you deserved." I turned to walk away, but Mason wasn't beside me anymore. I scanned the CR. The silence after Mason's speech didn't last long. A slow ripple of murmurs swept across the field like a gust of wind after a storm. Some clapped. Some stared in shock. Others just shifted uncomfortably. Natalie's proud moment had been cracked open like glass under pressure, and the cracks were beginning to show. I stood frozen, watching my son walk back to me with that same determination he always had when he believed in something. It was the same look he had when he stood up to a teacher for wrongly accusing his friend, or when he insisted I stop skipping dinner to work overtime. "Mason," I whispered, eyes misty. He simply smiled and squeezed my hand. Behind us, Natalie was still standing near the stage, tulips in hand, her expression unreadable. Her cheeks were flushed, and I could tell the weight of Mason's words had landed where mine never could. "Who let that boy up there?" I heard Greg snap from somewhere behind. "Where are the event organizers?" Mom tried to calm him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Let it go, Greg. It's done." Natalie stepped down from the stage slowly, her heels clicking on the wooden platform, each step sounding louder than the last. She made her way through the crowd toward us. I braced myself. "Hey," she said, softly, standing in front of me and Mason. "Hey," I replied, unsure what to expect. "I didn't think." She paused, glancing down at the tulips in her hand. "I didn't realize how much that would hurt you." "You meant it," I said. "It was your truth." She nodded slowly. "Yeah, but it wasn't the whole truth." Mason reminded me of that. My son looked up at her, arms crossed. "You were really unfair," he said, blunt as ever. Natalie let out a weak laugh. "Yeah. I was." An awkward silence followed. "You know," I said, breaking it, "I used to imagine this moment. Watching you walk across that stage. I thought I'd cry tears of pride. I didn't imagine feeling invisible." Natalie's eyes softened. "You were never invisible. Just inconvenient." "Ouch. But that wasn't your fault," she added quickly. "It was ours." Before I could respond, Mom appeared behind Natalie, her face tight. "Can I speak to you?" she said to Natalie, her tone sharp. Natalie hesitated. "In a minute, Mom." Mom's brows raised in surprise. She glanced at me, then back at Natalie. "Now." "No," Natalie said firmly. "I need a minute." For the first time in years, I saw my sister choose me over our mother. The moment was small, but monumental. After Mom stormed off in a huff, Greg trailing her, Natalie turned back to me. "Do you want to get coffee sometime? Just us?" I blinked. "You sure that won't ruin your perfect record?" She smirked. "Maybe it's time I stopped caring about records." We exchanged numbers, hugged briefly, still stiff, still cautious, and then she walked away to rejoin her classmates. I could see her shoulders square up, head held high, but her steps were slower. Thoughtful. I didn't expect anything to change overnight. But that moment? That moment was real. Later that evening, Mason and I stopped by a local diner. It was our tradition after anything remotely emotional. Burgers and milkshakes were our therapy. "You didn't have to do that, you know," I said, pushing a fry around my plate. Mason shrugged. "I did. I just didn't want to ruin her day." "She ruined yours," he said plainly. Someone had to say something. I leaned over and kissed the top of his curly head. "You're a good kid." "I'm your kid," he said with a grin. "You raised me right." That hit harder than I expected. I blinked quickly to push the tears back. "Do you think she meant what she said?" he asked. "About being sorry?" "I think she's figuring it out," I replied. "It's not easy to admit when you've been cruel." Mason nodded. "I just want people to see how awesome you are. It's not fair that they act like you're nothing." I smiled. "It's okay. I don't need their approval. But you deserve it." I didn't argue. He was right. The next day, I got a text from Natalie. "Hey. I told Mom I wanted to invite you and Mason to dinner. Just us. No drama. I want to talk more. Hope that's okay." I stared at the screen for a full minute. Was this real? Could she really be trying? I texted back, "Okay. We're in. Just don't make Mason give another speech," she replied almost instantly. Mason saw the exchange and smiled. "Told you. Don't get cocky," I said, ruffling his hair. "You're not a life coach just yet." "But maybe I should be," he said proudly. I saved a whole family in under 5 minutes. We both laughed. It was strange. How a moment of public humiliation had somehow turned into the beginning of something new. A crack in the wall we'd all built over the years. Maybe it wouldn't hold. Maybe the dinner would fall apart. Maybe Natalie would go back to pretending I didn't exist. But for now, We had a dinner plan. A text. A hope. And that was more than I'd had in a long time. Then saw him. 12 years old. Standing on the small platform where graduates had been called up. Holding a microphone. "Mason," I gasped. The crowd quieted as he tapped the mic. "My name's Mason Cooper," he began, voice shaking slightly, "and I wasn't supposed to speak today. But I think someone forgot to say thank you to my mom." Everyone turned. "Most of you don't know her," he said. "She works 2 jobs. She helped raise my aunt when she was little. She didn't get fancy awards or speeches. But she taught me how to be strong and kind. So if we're talking about examples, she's mine." Gasps echoed. A few people clapped. Others just stood still. I was speechless. Mason stepped down, walked toward me, and took my hand. Suddenly, my mother's pearls didn't shine as bright. And Natalie's applause didn't sound quite so loud. The invitation was simple: dinner at Natalie's condo on Saturday at 6 p.m. No parents, no plus ones, no drama. Just us and a chance to talk. I stared at the message all week, unsure how to feel. It was surreal. For so long, my relationship with Natalie had been stuck in a quiet war, one where I always lost by default, never having the ammunition of approval or attention. So this sudden outreach? It felt suspicious. Like walking into a room where a trap might be hidden under a perfectly set table. Still, Mason was excited. "She's trying, Mom," he said for the 5th time that Friday night as we were folding laundry. "You always say people deserve second chances." "I also say people show you who they are the first time," I replied. "But what if she's showing you a new version now?" That gave me pause. Saturday came too fast. Mason insisted on wearing a button-down shirt and even combed his hair, a rare effort. I kept it simple: jeans, a navy blouse, and earrings I hadn't worn since before Mason was born. I stared at myself in the mirror longer than I should have, wondering if Natalie would see me as someone worth respecting this time. Her condo was in one of those sleek new buildings downtown, modern, clean, impersonal. The kind of place that screamed success without saying much else. We stood outside her door, me clutching a bottle of sparkling cider I'd brought as a peace offering. Mason knocked. Natalie opened the door with a hesitant smile. She wore a soft gray sweater and jeans, no heels, no red lipstick, just her. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like she was dressing for someone else. "Hey," she said, stepping aside. "Hi," I said, offering the bottle. "Oh, thank you. Come in." The condo was spotless, of course. Every throw pillow matched, candles flickered on the dining table, and the smell of something warm and cheesy drifted from the kitchen. "You made lasagna?" I asked. She laughed lightly. "It's the one thing I don't screw up." Mason beamed. "I love lasagna." She looked at him and smiled. I remember. That small sentence carried so much weight. She remembered something about him, about us. I hadn't expected that. Dinner was surprisingly comfortable. We talked about school, Mason's interest in science fairs, and even some old childhood stories Natalie brought up, ones I thought she'd forgotten. She didn't bring up the graduation. Neither did I. But halfway through dessert, as we sat around the table with brownies and vanilla ice cream, she took a deep breath. "I need to say something," she said, fingers nervously tracing the rim of her water glass. I froze. Mason looked up from his plate. "I owe you an apology," she said, looking straight at me. "Not just for what I said at graduation. For a lot more than that." I stayed silent. "I spent years acting like you were just the girl who made poor choices. The cautionary tale. That's how Mom always painted it. And I went along with it because it was easier than confronting how broken our family really was." I blinked, unsure how to respond. "You worked harder than anyone I know. You raised an amazing kid. And you did it without a fraction of the support I got. That's something I should have respected a long time ago." The room went quiet, the clink of Mason's spoon the only sound. "I don't expect things to magically be okay," she added. "But I want to try. I want Mason to know he has an aunt who's proud of him. And I want you to know. I see you now." I felt a lump rise in my throat. Mason reached over and held my hand under the table. "Thank you," I said, my voice cracking. "That means more than you know. I'm not perfect," she added. "But I want to be better. If you let me." There it was, the thing I longed for but never expected. Not an apology delivered through gritted teeth. Not a performance. Just sincerity. "Okay," I said, smiling softly. Let's start over. Mason grinned. Can I still get seconds of dessert? We all laughed. The following week, Natalie texted me updates from her job, pictures of her dog, even a meme or two. It felt odd, but nice. We weren't best friends overnight, but something was healing, slowly. Then, on Thursday, Mom called. I heard you had dinner with your sister, she said coldly. I did. She told me she apologized. That she feels guilty for how things were. She should, I said, not sugarcoating. There was a pause. She's young. She was influenced. So was I, Mom. But you never gave me room to grow. Only her. Silence again. I hope you're not turning her against me. I laughed bitterly. You did that yourself. And with that, I hung up. It didn't feel good. But it didn't feel bad, either. It felt like a step forward. A few days later, Mason handed me a folded piece of paper. What's this? I asked. My English assignment. We had to write about someone we admire. I unfolded it and read. The person I admire most is my mom. Not because she's rich or famous, but because she's strong. When people ignored her, she still stood tall. When they laughed, she kept going. She raised me by herself and never once made me feel like I was missing anything. She's the reason I believe in kindness, in second chances, and in standing up, even when your voice shakes. I wiped a tear before it could fall. You're gonna make me cry in the middle of the kitchen, I said, pulling him in for a hug. That's okay, he whispered. You deserve happy tears for once. The next few weeks passed like spring rain, gentle but unpredictable. Some days were bright, with texts from Natalie or Mason coming home with stories about how she helped him with a science project. Other days, there was still a chill, especially whenever Mom's name came up. I hadn't spoken to her since I hung up the phone. But Natalie had. And that complicated things. She wants to meet, Natalie said one evening over coffee. Not for dinner or anything formal. Just a talk. With you. I looked at her carefully. And what do you think about that? She hesitated. I think she's scared. Of what? Of losing the one daughter who actually stuck around, she said, forcing a small smile. And maybe realizing she misjudged the other. I stared into my mug for a long time. She never apologized, Nat. Not once. Not when she kicked me out, not when she ignored Mason's birth. She never came to a single school event for him. I know, Natalie whispered. But maybe it's not about her anymore. Maybe it's about you getting to say what you never could. I agreed. Reluctantly. We met at a quiet diner near the old neighborhood. The kind of place that hadn't changed in 30 years, checkered floors, worn booths, and the same waitress I remembered from high school. Mom was already there when I arrived, wearing her usual pearls and a cardigan far too fancy for a diner. She looked older. Not just in wrinkles, but in weight, like her years were finally catching up to her. Hi, Darcy, she said, her voice tighter than I expected. Hi, I replied, sliding into the booth. An awkward silence fell between us as we each picked up the laminated menus. I wasn't hungry, and I doubted she was either. I'll just have coffee, I said to the waitress. Same, Mom added. When she left, Mom sighed. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure either. Another pause. I heard about Mason's essay, she said, her eyes softening. Natalie read it to me. I waited. He's a fine boy, she said. Smart. Kind. I suppose I didn't see that until recently. You never tried to see him at all. She nodded. You're right. I didn't. I was angry back then. You know that. Angry that I didn't live by your rules? Or that I made a life without your permission? Her lips pressed into a thin line. I was angry because you reminded me of myself. That stopped me. What? I got pregnant young too, Darcy. Before I met your father. My parents forced me to give the baby up. I never saw her again. I sat there stunned. I'd never heard this story. Not even a whisper of it. You were the child I had the right way. With a husband. With stability. So when you got pregnant at 19, I panicked. I thought you were throwing everything away. Like I had. I was cruel because I thought I was protecting you. But really, I was trying to erase a version of myself I never made peace with. I felt like the floor had shifted beneath me. And Natalie? I asked. You gave her everything. She was easier to mold, Mom said. She played the part. And I clung to that because I felt like I failed with you. She looked down at her hands. I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness. I know I haven't earned that. But I came to tell you the truth. Because you deserve to know. For the first time in years, I didn't see my mother as this cold, immovable figure. I saw someone haunted by her own mistakes. Someone who never healed from a choice she wasn't allowed to make. I needed a mother, Mom, I said quietly. Not a judge. I know, she whispered. And I'm sorry. The words hung between us, not as a cure, but as a beginning. The weeks that followed brought slow, cautious steps. Mom started coming by the house once a week. Sometimes just to drop off groceries or say hi to Mason. He was skeptical at first, rightfully so, but I could see her trying. One afternoon, Mason found her in the backyard helping me with the garden. You ever do this before? He asked, watching her fumble with a spade. Not since my mother's garden, she said. She made me weed every weekend. I hated it. He laughed. You're not very good at it. Nope, she said. But I'm here, aren't I? That answer, oddly enough, meant more than perfection ever could. Then came the graduation banquet. Mason was receiving a district award for leadership, and the school was hosting a formal event. I offered to skip it. After the last graduation mess, I wasn't eager to relive the trauma. But Mason insisted. I want you there, Mom, he said. I don't care what anyone else thinks. So I went. This time, Natalie arrived early to save us a seat near the front. Mom came too, wearing a simple dress and a nervous smile. The room was full of proud families and shining kids in suits and dresses. But something was different this time. The lights dimmed. The principal called up Mason. He walked to the stage, tall and sure. When he spoke, the entire room went quiet. My name is Mason Walters, and I'm honored to accept this award, he began. But I want to dedicate it to someone who showed me what leadership really means, not through titles or applause, but through actions. My heart started pounding. She taught me to speak up even when my voice shook. She raised me when others said she couldn't. She showed me that strength isn't loud, it's steady. This is for my mom. Tears spilled from my eyes before I could stop them. Natalie squeezed my hand. Mom dabbed at her own eyes with a tissue. This time, when the room applauded, it wasn't followed by silence. It was followed by my son walking off the stage straight into my arms. And this time, the applause was ours. After the graduation banquet, it felt like a chapter had quietly closed, one filled with wounds, silences, and long shadows. But even more remarkable, a new one had opened. And this time, it started with presence, not absence. Mason spent the summer before college working at a local community center, teaching kids how to code. He'd come home every evening full of stories, some hilarious, some touching. And often, those stories were shared not just with me, but with my mother. It still felt surreal to have her sitting at our kitchen table, peeling apples or sipping tea like she'd always belonged there. But the truth was, she hadn't. Not really. She'd had to earn her seat this time. And she did. Not through grand gestures or overcompensation, but through simple, steady efforts. A ride offered when I was working late. A dinner cooked without being asked. A box of Mason's childhood drawings she'd somehow kept tucked away for years. I didn't know what to do with them before, she admitted one afternoon. I just couldn't throw them out. I ran my fingers over the crayon-scribbled paper, a crooked house, a smiling stick figure of Grandma drawn from memory, or maybe hope. I guess he always had a place for you, I said softly. She smiled. I'm just grateful I still have time to earn it. In August, Mason packed for college. We stood in his room, watching him fit his life into duffel bags and plastic bins. Books, a framed photo of us, the hoodie he wore practically every day. You okay, Mom? He asked without looking up. I'm proud, I said. That's what I am. He paused. Not scared? Terrified, I laughed. But in a good way. He zipped up his last bag and sat beside me on the bed. You know, he said, when I was little, I thought I'd never have a big family. That it was just us against the world. And now? I still think it's us, he smiled. But the world feels less like an enemy. Tears welled in my eyes. I pulled him close, breathing in the scent of his shampoo and the faint trace of cologne. My little boy, not so little anymore. We drove to campus together, with Natalie following in her car. My mother had offered to come, but Mason gently said, let's make this trip just us. I think she understood. At the dorm, we helped him carry boxes and meet his new roommate. He laughed easily, introduced us like he wasn't nervous. But I saw the way his eyes lingered on me before we said goodbye. "Don't cry, Mom," he whispered. "No promises," I said, hugging him so tightly it probably embarrassed him. "You did it," Natalie whispered as we walked back to the parking lot. I looked at her. We did it. Back home, the house felt too quiet. His empty room was the loudest thing in the world. I found myself wandering into it one night, sitting on his bed and holding the pillow he used to sleep on. For a long time, I just sat there. That's when the door creaked open and my mother peeked in. "Didn't mean to interrupt," she said. "It's okay," I said, wiping my eyes. She sat beside me. For a while, we said nothing. Then she reached over, placing something in my hand. It was an old photo. Me at around Mason's age, holding a trophy from a high school spelling bee, eyes shining. My mother stood beside me in the photo, stiff but smiling. "I found it in the attic," she said. "I never gave you much praise, but I was proud. I just didn't know how to say it back then." I looked at the picture, feeling a small ache I hadn't realized was still there. Not pain, just the echo of something missing. "Thank you," I whispered. "I can't rewrite the past," she said. "But I hope, in some small way, I've helped shape a better future." "You have," I said. "For me. For Mason." She squeezed my hand. A month later, Mason sent a video. It was of him standing in front of a group of students at a campus diversity forum. He was speaking again. This time not about me, but about justice, and empathy, and breaking cycles of pain. "We are more than what we inherit," he said to the crowd. "We are what we choose to build next." I played the video for my mother. Her eyes were glassy. "He's remarkable," she said. "He had to be," I replied. "Because I needed to be." We sat in silence for a long time, the kind that didn't sting anymore. The kind that felt earned. Weeks passed, and life found a new rhythm. Mason came home for Thanksgiving that year, and this time, there was no tension, no whispered remarks or cold shoulders. Instead, he walked into a warm kitchen, hugged his grandmother first, and handed me a bouquet of wildflowers. "For the woman who built a life from ashes," he said, smiling. Everyone clapped. But I didn't cry. Because this time, I didn't need validation. I had it in my son's eyes, in my sister's loyalty, in the slow, painful but honest growth of my mother's heart. When we all sat down to eat, Mason raised his glass. "To family," he said, "not the one you're born into, but the one you build." I raised mine too. "To second chances." The room echoed with laughter and clinking glasses. No more applause laced with shame. No more silence used as punishment. Only warmth, honesty, and finally, peace.